They say every neighborhood has secrets. Some are buried beneath fresh coats of paint, sealed behind locked doors, or whispered only when the lights go out. But others linger in plain sight, hiding in spaces meant for joy. The playground at the edge of Maple Street was supposed to be a safe place for children, with its rusted swings and chipped slides, a reminder of simpler times. Yet at night, the air shifted there. The shadows stretched differently. Parents spoke in hushed tones, and the children, those who still dared to go, came back pale, silent, forever changed. What lives in the quiet corners of a forgotten park? What waits when the sun goes down? If you enjoy haunted stories told in cinematic detail, stay with me. The sun was sinking low, bleeding gold into rust across the rooftops, when the playground at the corner of Maple Street took on its truest shape. By daylight, it looked ordinary, peeling blue paint on the monkey bars, weeds growing tall between the cracks in the pavement, and a swing set that creaked under the slightest breeze. But at dusk, the colors deepened into bruises, shadows thickened in places they shouldn't, and the air grew strangely heavy. Locals said the playground had been there since the 1950s, long before the neighborhood filled with identical houses and trimmed hedges. Generations of children had played there, their laughter echoing into the night. Yet for every story of joy, there were whispers of accidents, of disappearances, of children who wandered home in tears, claiming something had followed them. On this evening, the streets were quiet, windows glowing faintly as families gathered for dinner. Only the wind moved, whistling through the rusted chains of the swings. One of them swayed harder than the others, back and forth, though the air was still. If you stood close enough, you'd hear it, a faint metallic groan that carried the rhythm of something unseen pushing from behind. The sandpit, cracked and dry, still bore the impressions of small feet, though no child had played there for hours. Beneath the slide, where the concrete met dirt, a darker patch of shadow lingered, refusing to shift even as the light changed. Some swore they saw shapes inside that shadow, tiny hands pressed against an invisible barrier, clawing silently to be let out. A neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, often pulled her curtains tight before nightfall. She claimed she once heard voices outside, children whispering, though when she peeked through the glass, the playground stood empty. She refused to speak of what the whispers said, only that they weren't speaking English. Not any language she knew. The police dismissed it, of course. They always did. Kids wandered off. Accidents happened, and fear spread faster than truth. But those who lived closest knew better. They watched their clocks at night, counting the minutes until midnight, because that was when the playground seemed to breathe. The chains rattled, the sand shifted, and sometimes laughter drifted across the block, soft, thin, and wrong. That night, the laughter started again. It carried faintly, like a recording played too far away, barely audible yet sharp enough to raise the hair on the back of your neck. And if you dared to step closer, past the cracked gate and onto the gravel path, you might see them. Small figures darting between the equipment, too fast, too blurred, vanishing when you blinked. Children, or what was left of them. A streetlight buzzed overhead, flickering once, twice, then going out completely. The darkness pulled thick, and in the silence that followed, only the swing moved, creaking forward, then back, as though inviting someone to sit. No one did. Not yet, but the feeling lingered. That if you sat, if you let the chains curl cold around your hands and your legs dangle loosely above the earth, something would push. Something patient. Something waiting. The last glow of daylight vanished, swallowed by night, and the playground exhaled a sigh no human mouth had made, and from somewhere deep inside the shadows, something small began to hum. By day, the sandpit was nothing more than a shallow square, its wooden frame splintered at the corners, filled with dirt more than sand, and littered with broken toys that no one ever bothered to collect. A plastic shovel with a cracked handle, a headless doll buried halfway in the grit, a single sneaker, stiff with age, its laces curled like dried worms, but at night, the sandpit changed. The air above it seemed denser, as if the ground itself was holding its breath. Neighbors said that if you walked close after sundown, you'd hear something, a soft stirring, like the sound of children digging beneath the surface. It wasn't the random shuffle of raccoons or stray cats. It was rhythmic, coordinated, like little hands clawing at the dirt from the inside out. It was easy to dismiss at first. Wind carried strange noises. Old wood creaked. And imagination was a cruel trickster. Yet, those who lingered longer than they should claimed the whispers came next. Low, hushed voices rising from the sand, words too muffled to understand. Sometimes a giggle cut through, sharp and fleeting, the kind of sound a child makes when they're hiding, waiting for you to find them. One evening, a boy named Daniel swore he heard his own name. He had been walking home from his friend's house, the playground cutting across the shortest path. The sun had already slipped behind the trees, the air painted blue and gray. He stopped near the sandpit, and there it was, his name, carried on a voice that sounded just like his sister's. Only his sister had been homesick all day, miles away. The whisper came again, closer now, pulling him toward the square of dirt. He peered over the edge, and the ground moved. Not much, just a shiver as if something beneath had shifted, rolling onto its side. He ran before it could move again. That same night, Mrs. Callahan, restless behind her curtain, said she saw Daniel sprint past her yard, pale as milk, eyes wide, mouth open as though screaming, but no sound came out. His lips moved, but the street swallowed the noise whole. He never told anyone what he truly saw, not even his mother. Only that he would never take the shortcut again. Stories multiplied. A group of teenagers dared each other to stand inside the pit at midnight. Only one agreed. He climbed down into the square, laughing, brushing aside the brittle sand with his shoes. "Nothing here," he muttered. But then he froze. His friends leaned over the edge, asking what was wrong. The boy's voice cracked when he whispered that something was holding his ankle. Not tight, not painful, just a small, cold hand gripping him gently, as though begging him not to leave. When his friends pulled him out, the impression was still there, in the dirt, a perfect outline of tiny fingers, already fading as the night swallowed it whole. The whispers grew bolder after that. People claimed they heard them even when walking by on the far side of the street. Murmurs carried on the wind, sharp enough to tug at the edge of your thoughts. Sometimes they imitated familiar voices, calling children by name, mimicking parents, repeating phrases no one else could possibly know. The police brushed it off. Echoes, they said. Old pipes under the ground. But what pipes giggle? What pipes whisper secrets? There were rumors that the sandpit wasn't part of the original playground at all, that it had been added later, filling in a shallow depression in the earth. Some claimed it was once a pond, long dried up, where a boy drowned in the late 1960s. Others swore it covered an older foundation, the remnants of a home that had burned to ash, with children trapped inside. No records were ever found. But people wondered, and they kept their children away. Still, every now and then, someone would wander too close, and the whispers would rise again, curling around their ears like smoke, coaxing, pleading, promising, and on certain nights, When the moon was low and the wind stilled, the sandpit didn't just whisper. It sang. A low, haunting lullaby carried on voices that weren't human, drifting through the dark like a mother rocking her child to sleep, but no one ever saw who was singing. Only the sand, shifting softly, as though something beneath it was moving closer to the surface. There are two swings at the playground on Maple Street. One hangs stiff and motionless, its chains rusted, its seat tilted slightly to the side. But the other, always the other, moves when it shouldn't. It sways gently in the stillness of midnight, rocking forward and back, as though someone invisible has claimed it.at first. Neighbors thought it was the wind. A breeze curling through the trees, nudging the swing into motion. But even on nights when the air was perfectly still, when not a single leaf shifted on the branches above, the swing continued its slow, steady rhythm. Sometimes it would move in sharp jerks, rising higher as if pushed by strong hands. Other times it rocked in a lull, like a cradle soothing something restless to sleep. Children used to dare each other to sit on it, to feel the unseen force for themselves. Most didn't last long. They would climb onto the seat, laughing, pretending they weren't afraid, until the chains grew cold in their palms and their stomachs turned with the slow momentum. It was fine at first, almost playful, but then the swing would lurch higher, harder, as though impatient. The laughter would die, faces would pale, and every child who tried it swore the same thing, that they felt hands on their back. Small at first, then larger, heavier, pressing. One boy, Tommy Harker, swore he heard a voice when he sat on the swing. A faint whisper right in his ear. Not angry, not kind, just a simple command, don't stop. He leapt off before the chains could pull him higher, scraping his knees in the gravel, sprinting home with tears streaking his face. He never touched the swing again. It wasn't just children who noticed. One autumn night, a man walking his dog stopped at the playground fence. His dog refused to move forward, growling low, hackles raised. The man followed the animal's gaze and froze. The swing was in full motion, rising almost to the height of the frame, chains clanging, the seat cutting through the air in sharp arcs. There was no one there. He backed away, tugging his dog by the collar, but before he left he swore he heard something else, the creak of another chain, higher up, heavier, as though something unseen had joined the game. Locals whispered that the swing belonged to a girl who never made it home. A girl whose parents lived 3 streets over, still leaving her bedroom light on after all these years. Some said she disappeared right there on the playground, one moment laughing with her friends, the next gone. Others claimed she had been found at the edge of the woods, her body cold, her lips curved into a strange smile. The details changed, but the story always ended the same. Her spirit never left the swing. By the 1980s, parents forbade their children to play there after dark. But still, the swing kept moving. Some nights it barely stirred. Others, it screamed, chains rattling so loudly that people down the block would wake and peer through their curtains, hearts racing. They told themselves it was the wind. It had to be the wind. And yet, when they checked the trees, the branches were still. Perfectly still. Mrs. Callahan, always watching from her window, swore she saw something once. A figure sitting there. A girl in a pale dress, hair hanging in her face, rocking back and forth. The image was faint, blurred, like a reflection in rippling water. She blinked, and it was gone. But the swing kept moving, faster now, as though whatever sat there was still pushing itself higher, desperate to reach something just out of sight. No one dares to chain the swing down. They've tried before. The locks always break. The chains always snap open by morning, as though something refuses to be bound. And the motion begins again. Forward, back, forward, back. On the coldest nights, when the moon is hidden and the air tastes like metal, the swing rises to its highest arc, straining against the frame, groaning as though the bolts might tear free. And if you stand close enough, if you let your eyes adjust to the dark, you might see it. Just for a moment. The faint outline of a child's hands gripping the chain, knuckles pale, refusing to let go. And when the swing slows, when the chains finally fall quiet, those hands are still there, waiting for the next child brave enough to sit down. The playground had always been surrounded by a chain-link fence. Rusted at the bottom, bent at the corners, it sagged inward as though the weight of time pressed against it. In daylight, the fence was nothing but an eyesore. But at night, when the streetlights flickered and the shadows deepened, it became something else entirely, something like a barrier. A thin line that separated those who were safe from whatever waited inside. It was on one such night, years ago, that the neighbors began to whisper about the man behind the fence. Some said he was a drifter, a shadow of the city's forgotten, wandering into the neighborhood by accident. Others swore he was something older, tethered to the ground, drawn to the playground long before houses were ever built around it. He appeared rarely, always after dark, always near the same corner of the fence, where the metal curled outward like a door that wanted to open but never did. He stood perfectly still, tall and thin, his posture stiff as though his spine had been carved from wood. His face, when people dared to describe it, was indistinct, a blur as if the air itself refused to hold his features. But what they remembered most were his eyes. Not their color, not their shape, but the way they shone faintly in the dark, like coins catching a sliver of light from somewhere far away. Children were the first to notice him. They would return home after dusk, trembling, swearing that someone had been watching from the fence. Parents told them it was nonsense, just a trick of the light, but deep down many believed their children, because they too had seen him. Mrs. Callahan told the story best. She had gone to close her curtains late one evening when she froze. There, across the street, the man stood at the fence, his hands curled tightly around the chain links. He wasn't moving, wasn't speaking, but she felt it, the undeniable sense that he was staring directly at her. The longer she looked, the stronger it grew, until her knees buckled beneath her. She yanked the curtains shut, heart racing, breath shallow. When she finally dared to look again, he was gone. Others described similar encounters. Some swore he paced the perimeter of the playground, dragging his fingers along the metal with a screeching sound that scraped their ears long after he vanished. A few claimed he whispered through the fence, low and coaxing, his words just out of reach, like a language they almost understood but couldn't quite grasp. And sometimes, on the rare nights when fog rolled in heavy from the river, people swore they saw him not outside the fence but inside, standing by the sandpit or near the swings, as if the barrier meant nothing at all. Police reports were filed. Patrol cars circled the block, but no one ever caught him. No footprints. No evidence. Only fear. As the years passed, his appearances grew more unpredictable. Some winters he vanished entirely, as though the cold kept him at bay. But always, when spring returned and children dared to laugh in the playground again, he followed. Watching, waiting, rumors spread like disease. One story claimed that a boy once approached the fence, curious, drawn by a voice calling his name. The boy walked closer and closer until his small fingers brushed the cold metal. Then he froze, staring up at the figure towering above him. Witnesses swore the boy's lips moved, whispering back, though no one heard what he said. They pulled him away before he could slip through the bent corner of the fence, but afterward, he was never the same. Quiet, distant, and sometimes, in the dead of night, his parents claimed they heard him laughing softly in his room, though his face, when they checked on him, was blank, his eyes wide open. The fence became a line of defense, however frail. Parents warned their children, never touch it after dark. Never listen when a voice calls from the other side. Never let curiosity outweigh caution. But warnings can only protect for so long. Children are drawn to mysteries. And the man behind the fence seemed to know that. Some nights, people swore he beckoned with one long, pale hand. Other times, he simply stood and waited, patient as the moon. And once, only once, a woman claimed she saw him smile. Not a kind smile, not even a cruel one. Just a slow, deliberate stretching of his mouth, like someone remembering how to use their face. And no one could explain him. No one could stop him. He came and went like smoke, leaving only whispers and shivers in his wake. But everyone in the neighborhood agreed on one thing. The playground was not his prison. It was his lure, and each night, when the fence rattled in the wind, people held their breath. Because sometimes it wasn't the wind at all. Sometimes it was him, tugging gently, testing the barrier, waiting for the moment when it finally gave way. Some of the stories around Maple Street Playground lived only in whispers, hushed tones over fences, fragments overheard in the grocery store aisle. But then there were the ones that carried the weight of grief, warnings spoken with trembling hands and sleepless eyes. They usually came from mothers. One in particular was remembered more than the rest. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She had lived in the neighborhood for nearly 20 years, raising her daughter, Lily, in the house closest to the playground. For most of Lily's childhood, Evelyn had thought little of the place. It was simply there, a patch of rusting equipment, a place to burn off energy before supper. But one summer evening, everything changed. Lily had gone missing for only 2 hours. 2 hours, but to Evelyn it stretched like a lifetime. She had called for her, searched the yard, the sidewalks, the neighbors' porches. When she finally found her daughter, Lily was standing alone inside the playground gate, barefoot, her dress streaked with dirt. She was staring at the swings, lips moving as though whispering to someone. Though no one else was there, Evelyn ran to her, heart hammering. But when she touched Lily's arm, the girl recoiled violently, as if her mother's hand had burned her skin. For a moment, her eyes looked wrong, distant, glazed, reflecting the dim glow of the streetlight in a way no child's eyes should. Then she blinked, and the look was gone. When Evelyn pressed her to explain, Lily said only this: "They told me I can stay if I want." The words burrowed into Evelyn's mind, festering there. Stay where? Stay with who? She pulled her daughter home, locked every door, shut every curtain. But that night, as she tried to calm her racing thoughts, Evelyn heard her daughter's voice again. Not from her room. From outside, she ran to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. There was Lily, standing barefoot in the grass, facing the playground. Her small figure looked so fragile in the dark, her hair stirring slightly, though there was no wind. And she was answering someone, pausing, nodding, speaking softly, like she was listening to instructions. Evelyn sprinted outside, grabbing her daughter, dragging her back inside, heart shattering with terror. She never forgot the way Lily screamed, not in fear, but in anger, like something was being taken from her. Something she wanted. From that night on, Evelyn changed. She became the mother everyone whispered about. She walked her daughter to school every day, gripping her hand so tightly the knuckles whitened. She kept her inside on weekends, blinds drawn, as if the daylight wasn't safe enough. When other parents asked, she would shake her head, her voice low. Don't let them near the playground. Don't let them answer when it calls. At first, people dismissed her as paranoid. Trauma, they said. Too much stress. But then Lily began to change. She no longer laughed the way she used to. She no longer played with her dolls or sang along to the radio. She grew pale, her eyes ringed with shadows, her body thin and restless. Some nights, Evelyn swore she heard her daughter talking in her sleep, whispering conversations that carried the faint cadence of children's voices, but in a language she couldn't recognize. Once, during a storm, Evelyn found Lily at the window again, pressing her palms to the glass. They said the rain means they're awake, she murmured, her voice soft, her smile fragile and strange. Evelyn yanked her away, but the words lingered in her mind like an infection. Her warnings grew louder after that. She begged the neighbors not to let their children out after dark. She nailed handwritten signs to the fence, "Keep out," "Not safe." The city removed them within days. The police dismissed her calls. Even other parents avoided her, muttering that grief and fear had twisted her into something unstable, but Evelyn didn't care. She knew point one night, a neighbor recalled, Evelyn showed up on their doorstep in tears. She said she'd woken to the sound of the front door creaking open, and when she rushed downstairs, Lily was gone. She found her standing at the playground again, barefoot, her dress clinging to her in the damp night air. This time, Evelyn didn't yell. She didn't drag her back. She stood at the gate, heartbreaking, and asked, "Who are you talking to?" Lily tilted her head, her eyes bright, her mouth curling into the faintest smile. And she answered, clear enough for Evelyn to never forget, "My friends." Evelyn gathered her daughter into her arms that night, but she knew she was losing her. The light in Lily's eyes was dimming, being replaced by something else, something older, patient, waiting. She told anyone who would listen, the playground doesn't just take them. Sometimes it brings them back, but they're not the same. Soon after, Evelyn and Lily moved away. Their house stood empty for months, windows dark, curtains drawn. No one ever saw them again, but Evelyn's warning remained, whispered like a curse across Maple Street. Don't let your children near the playground. Don't let them answer when it calls. The sound of chains creaking against rusted hinges broke the silence of the playground that night. No wind moved through the trees, no stray animals stirred in the shadows, yet the swing swayed as though some unseen child gently rocked back and forth. Its movement was deliberate, not wild or random, a slow pendulum that cut through the still air with unnerving rhythm. Each squeak echoed louder than it should have, bouncing off the houses and vanishing into the sleeping dark. People who witnessed it swore the swing never stopped once it began, as though it had been claimed by something that refused to let go. Children had always avoided the swings, even in daylight. They preferred the slide, the monkey bars, or the roundabout, but never the swings. When asked, they couldn't explain why, only muttering that the seat felt too cold, too heavy, as if someone was already sitting there. Some even said they felt hands brush against their own when they tried to hold the chains. Parents dismissed it as imagination, but the children's unease lingered, and over time the swings were left untouched, their metal frames slowly rusting into skeletal shapes. One evening, a young boy named Amir dared to test the rumors. His friends dared him, laughing and calling him a coward as the shadows stretched across the playground. Determined not to be mocked, he marched to the swings, sat down, and began to push off with his feet. For a moment, nothing seemed strange. He swayed back and forth, faster and higher, until his laughter filled the air. But then, the chains grew stiff. The swing slowed, not from lack of momentum, but as if unseen hands tightened their grip around it. Amir kicked harder, struggling against the resistance, his smile faltering as the seat refused to rise again. He leapt off, stumbling in the dirt, his face pale. He didn't say what he felt, only shook his head violently when the others asked. He never returned to the playground after that. Neighbors began to notice the swing moving on nights when no one was there. From bedroom windows, they'd glance out and see it swaying in the moonlight, empty but alive. Sometimes both swings moved together, as if two children sat side by side, playing in silence. Other times, only one would shift, jerking suddenly, as though something invisible struggled angrily to hold on. One woman claimed she saw footprints forming in the sand below, small and light, pressed deep by something that wasn't there. She shut her curtains and never looked again. The stories grew darker when people spoke of voices. Low, muffled whispers carried on the air, impossible to understand yet sharp enough to freeze blood. They seemed to come from the swings, riding along with the creaking sound of the chains. Some thought they were children's voices, others swore they were deeper, older, filled with grief. The whispers always ended the same way, a sudden sharp laugh, cut short as if the speaker had been dragged away mid-breath. One man, curious and skeptical, decided to film the swings one night. He set his camera on a tripod, angled it toward the playground, and waited. Hours passed with nothing but stillness until, just after midnight, the swing began to move. First a gentle sway, then faster as if pushed by unseen hands. The man leaned closer to the screen, eyes narrowing. Suddenly, the swing stopped. Completely. Not a tremor, not a shift. Frozen in midair. He swore the chains stretched tight, held by something just out of sight. Then, slowly, the seat turned toward the camera, as if whatever sat upon it was staring back at him. The man stumbled back, the recording ending abruptly. He refused to share the footage with anyone, and days later, he moved out of the neighborhood without explanation. But the most chilling story was whispered about a girl named Sana. She had wandered from her home during a sleepless night, drawn to the creaking sound outside her window. Her parents found the front door ajar, her slippers left neatly by the step. The neighbors said they heard the chains that night, louder than ever, echoing across the street like a bell tolling. When the search began, they found nothing, no footprints, no torn fabric, no trace of her anywhere. Only the swing, swaying gently in the breeze that didn't exist. To this day, her family leaves flowers at the base of the swings, though no one dares to touch them. The playground grew emptier after that. People crossed the street to avoid it, refusing to walk too close. Yet the swing never rested. Whether at dusk, midnight, or the thin hours before dawn, it always moved, always creaked, always waited. And those who looked too long swore they saw the faint outline of small legs, dangling in the dark, kicking just high enough to brush the dirt. Perhaps it was only imagination, born from fear and stories. Or perhaps the playground wasn't as empty as it seemed. For on the coldest nights, when the fog thickened and the air held its breath, the sound of two swings rose together in perfect unison, like children keeping time in a game no one alive could understand. And sometimes, when the chains stopped, the laughter carried on. From the playground, if you stood at the far corner near the fence and looked past the trees, you could see a house. Not just any house, but the one everyone avoided speaking about, the one that always seemed to lean closer when the moon was full. Its windows were tall and narrow, and though the curtains hung there like rotted teeth, people swore the glass behind them glittered with eyes. The house was alive in ways wood and stone should never be, as if it breathed through the cracks in its walls and listened through the nails driven deep into its frame. Children said it was where the missing went. Not the ones who moved away or were taken by chance, but the ones who vanished near the playground, their faces fading from memory like chalk washed away in rain. They whispered that the house collected them, hiding their laughter in its rafters, storing their footsteps in its hollow floors. It was not a home, but a mouth, a patient one, waiting to swallow what the neighborhood dared not protect. One evening, a man named Faisal, who had grown tired of the stories, decided to see for himself. He lived 2 streets over and had often caught his wife staring nervously at the house whenever they passed it on evening walks. He scoffed at her fear, called it superstition, and promised he'd prove the stories wrong. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and a restless curiosity, he crossed the street and approached the sagging front steps. The air grew colder the closer he came, though it was midsummer and the crickets sang thickly in the grass. The wood creaked beneath his shoes, long groans that seemed to mimic speech, as though the house was muttering to itself about this foolish visitor. The door hung ajar. Not wide, just enough to show it had been waiting. Faisal paused, his breath short, then pressed forward and slipped inside. Neighbors claimed they heard him that night. Not his footsteps, not his voice, but the sharp scrape of something heavy being dragged across the floorboards. The sound came again and again, as though something shifted inside, too large and too stubborn to fit where it was being pulled. And then silence. His wife called for him until her throat ached, but no answer ever came. The next morning, the house looked the same as always, but the door was closed, tightly sealed, as though it had never opened at all. They searched, of course. Police combed the house in daylight, their flashlights cutting across walls peeling like old skin. The rooms were empty, stripped bare, save for a faint smell of dust and damp. No body, no blood, nothing to explain where he'd gone. Yet one officer swore he saw something in the corner of an upstairs room, a shadow shaped like a man crouching, hands pressed over its ears. But when the beam of light reached it, the corner was empty, and the smell of iron filled his nose until he gagged. He refused to return after that. Over time, more stories bled out from the house. Strange flickers in the windows when the street was otherwise dark. Curtains that shifted though no one lived inside. A faint tapping, rhythmic and hollow, echoing down the street late at night, as if something inside was counting. Always counting. The children, bold in their cruelty, sometimes dared each other to run up and touch the front door. Few made it all the way. Those who did often returned pale, saying the wood felt warm, like skin pulled taut over bone. None of them dared knock. One girl, who lived across the street, spoke of voices. At night, she'd wake to the sound of whispers drifting through her open window. She would rise and peek between her curtains, only to find her eyes drawn to that house. The whispers never came from her yard, never from her room. They came from across the street, slipping out of those narrow windows, floating through the night air until they pressed into her ears. Sometimes they said her name. Sometimes they cried like children too tired to play. Once she swore they laughed, a deep rumble that made her teeth ache. Her parents forbade her from speaking of it again, but she did not forget. The house stands still, its spine bent but unbroken, its gaze fixed upon the playground. When the swings creak and the slide groans, The house seems to lean closer, as though listening, as though waiting for the next child to wander too near. Some nights, if you're foolish enough to look long enough, you'll swear the boards shift, reshaping themselves, the windows narrowing like eyes, the roof arching like a brow. Watching. Always watching. The playground feeds it, some say. The laughter, the whispers, the vanished, all offerings for the house that will not die. Perhaps it is not separate from the playground at all, but simply its shadow, its heart, its hunger. A place where the echoes of lost children gather, pressed against the walls, waiting for release. And if you stand too long at the fence and let your gaze linger, you may feel the weight of that house settle on your shoulders, dragging you toward it, step by step, until you cannot remember why you wanted to leave. And though the door may be shut, though the windows may be dark, there is one thing no one can deny: the house watches, day and night, with patience beyond human measure. And when it decides to open its mouth again, when it decides to swallow another, no one will be able to stop it. The only question that remains is simple, cruel, and impossible to shake. Who will it take next? The sand in the playground was never clean. It was not the soft, golden sand poured for safety in other parks, but gray, gritty, and damp, clumping into strange shapes that never seemed to dry. Even when the sun scorched the metal slides so hot it burned bare skin, the sand stayed cool, moist, almost freshly turned. Parents noticed, but did not linger on it, chalking it up to bad drainage, old soil, or some forgotten flaw. Yet children knew something else, something wordless, a feeling deep in their bones. The sand was not empty. It listened. It moved at night, when the world hushed and the swing creaked its lonely rhythm, the sand would shift. Tiny hills formed where none had been, shallow valleys etched like careful patterns. Those who passed by late claimed to see small ridges crawling across the ground, as if fingers pressed just beneath the surface, tracing shapes too quick to follow. And when the wind fell still, they swore they heard it, the faintest whisper, like breath pushed through clenched teeth, spilling from the grains themselves. Words too soft to catch, but sharp enough to keep listeners awake, for Night's Point One story tells of a boy named Jamal, who brought his toy truck to the playground after sunset. His parents, distracted, thought nothing of it until he returned home pale, clutching the toy to his chest. When asked what frightened him, he said the sand spoke. It told him to dig, told him to bury his truck deeper, deeper, until he couldn't see it anymore. He obeyed, shoving handfuls of grit over the toy, but when he tried to pull it back out, something pulled from the other side. The truck vanished beneath the surface with a snap, and Jamal swore he saw a pale hand retreat with it into the dark below. His parents laughed, though nervously, until they returned with him the next morning. The sand was smooth, undisturbed, no toy in sight. Jamal never played there again. Others claimed the sand was a graveyard, that the missing children lay beneath, buried by whatever called the playground home. Sometimes people said you could see them. Not fully, never whole, but hints, the curve of a cheekbone just below the surface, the hollow of an eye socket staring up through the grains, the faint impression of lips moving though no sound escaped. They came and went like the tide, there one moment, gone the next, leaving only silence behind. And always the whispers followed. Sometimes desperate, sometimes mocking, sometimes begging for a name that no one remembered anymore. A man walking his dog late one evening stopped when his animal froze at the fence. The dog's fur bristled, its body shaking, teeth bared toward the sandbox. At first, the man saw nothing. But then the sand shifted, a ripple spreading outward, slow and deliberate. In the center, a small depression formed, as though something inside inhaled deeply, tasting the air. The man yanked his dog's leash and fled. Later, he told neighbors that the sandbox was alive, breathing like a buried lung, each grain expanding and contracting in silent rhythm. No one laughed. Children spoke of games played with the whispers. Dares where one had to kneel by the sandbox, press an ear close, and listen for a full minute. Some said they heard lullabies sung in voices not their own. Others claimed they heard their names, repeated again and again until they could not bear it. A few insisted they heard laughter, not of children, but of something old and hollow, a sound that shook the sand into shivering waves. Those who listened too long often returned different, quiet, withdrawn, eyes darting as though they carried secrets they were too afraid to speak. Parents said it was just fright, but the children knew better. The whispers had entered them. And whispers, once inside, never truly left point one summer night. The sand turned violent. Witnesses swore it moved like water, rippling up in waves, forming ridges that grew higher and higher until they collapsed. In the chaos, a shape emerged, the faint outline of a child crawling upward, its face half-formed, its arms made of dust. It opened its mouth as if to scream, but no sound came, only more sand spilling out in torrents. The shape reached toward the fence, stretching long, finger-like ridges, before collapsing in silence, leaving nothing but smooth ground behind. The neighbors locked their doors that night and spoke of it only in whispers, but the most chilling tale came from a woman named Nadira. She swore she saw a boy standing barefoot in the sandbox one night, his head tilted, his body stiff as a doll. His skin was the same gray as the grains beneath him, blending so seamlessly that he seemed carved from the ground itself. She blinked, and in that instant, the boy sank. Slowly, deliberately, the sand swallowed him whole, starting with his feet, rising past his knees, his chest, until only his head remained, eyes locked on hers. And then, with a final gasp of dust, he was gone. The sand smoothed itself as though nothing had ever disturbed it. Nadira has not spoken above a whisper since. The sandbox still waits, quiet and gray, its grains cool no matter the season, as if the earth beneath has never seen the sun. The swings creak, the slide groans, but the sand listens, patient and hungry. And if you dare kneel close enough, you may hear your name breathed back at you, faint but unmistakable. A promise, perhaps, or a warning, and when the sand shifts again, when the whispers rise louder, will they finally climb free of their shallow graves, or will they only drag someone new below? Shadows have always been harmless things. They flicker, stretch, and vanish with the turn of a light. But in this neighborhood, one shadow refused to obey. It clung stubbornly to the playground even when the sun had long since gone, when no lamp or moonlight fell across its dirt. A dark smear that should not have been, shaped not like a tree or a fence, but like a person. Small, childlike, lingering at the base of the monkey bars. Some swore it even moved, though nothing solid cast it.at first. People dismissed it as trick of the eye. An oil stain. A patch of mold. But the more they looked, the less sense it made. On rainy nights, when the sand turned to mud, the shadow remained sharp, perfectly defined. On moonless evenings, when darkness swallowed the park hole, the shadow was darker still, a black hole on the ground that even starlight refused to touch. And then the whispers began. It started with children, as always. They said the shadow followed them. Not home, not far, but across the playground itself. If they climbed the slide, the shadow would wait at the bottom. If they crossed the roundabout, it would crouch at the edge. When they ran, It ran faster, yet never made a sound. Sometimes they swore it reached upward, fingers long and stretched, trying to grab their ankles before retreating again. Adults ignored these stories until they too noticed. Walking home from late shifts, they'd glance across the street and see the shadow still crouched there, watching. Waiting point one night, a teenager named Usman decided to test it. Brave from the false courage of youth, he entered the playground under a yellowed streetlight and walked toward the monkey bars. The shadow lay where it always did, flat and motionless. He laughed, circling it, shining his flashlight directly at the ground. No matter the angle, the beam revealed nothing but sand. Yet the shadow stayed, untouched by the light, darker even than the night around it. Amused, he stomped his foot in the center. The ground gave, a puff of dust rising. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shadow shifted. Slowly, deliberately. Its head tilted upward though it had no face, its body twisting like smoke trapped in 2 dimensions. Usman froze, flashlight trembling as the shadow reached one thin arm toward his boot. His light flickered, and in that instant, the shadow stretched higher, climbing the metal bars like something alive. Usman ran, stumbling so fast he left his shoe behind. When he returned at dawn with friends, the shadow was back in its usual place, crouched low at the ground. The shoe, however, was gone. Neighbors began to avoid the park altogether. Still, the shadow did not fade. In fact, it grew bolder. One man swore he saw it standing upright one night, long and tall, arms dragging against the dirt. Another claimed it clung to the swing, its outline flickering as though a child sat there even when the seat moved empty. A woman passing by early one morning screamed when she realized her own shadow bent the wrong way, stretching not from her body, but toward the playground, pulled by something she could not see. She never took that route again, but the most terrifying story belonged to a boy named Hamza. His parents said he came home pale, lips trembling, unable to speak more than a single sentence. He whispered, "It knows my name." When pressed, he explained through tears that while playing alone, the shadow had moved toward him and spoken. Not aloud, not through the air, but inside his mind, like a voice whispered directly against his thoughts. It called him gently, coaxing, promising to play forever if he'd only sit beside it. His parents forbade him from returning, but at night, they swore they saw him standing at his bedroom window, staring toward the playground, whispering back into the dark. Some believe the shadow is the first child who vanished, the one whose name no one remembers. Trapped between here and whatever waits beyond, clinging desperately to the only place it once knew. Others think it is older, far older, not a child at all, but something wearing the shape of one, baiting the living to draw closer. Whatever the truth, the shadow has not left. Not once. It has outlasted the seasons, the rain, the shifting sand. It waits, patient and silent, knowing eventually someone will answer its call. The strangest part is this: photographs taken of the playground never show it. Cameras catch the rusted slide, the leaning swing set, the cracked roundabout, but never the shadow. It does not appear on film, no matter the angle or time of night. Yet anyone who stands there in person sees it clearly. Solid, darker than dark. Proof that some things cannot be captured, only endured. To this day, the shadow crouches at the monkey bars. Sometimes still, sometimes restless. If you pass by, you may feel its gaze follow you, though it has no eyes. You may feel your own shadow stretch unnaturally, tugging toward the ground where it waits. And if you stand too close, if you linger too long, you may hear your name spoken softly in your thoughts, a voice colder than night air, promising playtime that never ends. The question is not whether the shadow will move. It already has. The question is, what will it do when it finally steps free from the ground, and who will it follow home? The neighborhood had always known the playground was wrong, but wrong had become normal. The creaking swings, the damp sand, the house that watched with shuttered eyes, the shadow crouched at the bars, all of it blurred into folklore, into bedtime warnings that parents whispered with nervous smiles. Until the night the playground finally exhaled. It began subtly, as it always does. A ripple in the sandbox, though no wind stirred. The creak of the swings moving in perfect unison, their chains stretched taut though no one sat there. A low groan shivering up from the roundabout, metal straining as if pulled by weight invisible. One neighbor, restless, peered through her blinds and saw everything trembling, not violently, but like a body breathing in sleep. The entire playground shifted with the slow, deliberate rhythm of lungs filling and emptying. She swore the sand rose and fell, the swings swayed with each inhale, the shadow stretched longer with every exhale. She closed her curtains, but the sound of whispering bled through the glass. More eyes turned that night. Curtains parted, doors cracked, and fear silenced the street. Families watched in horror as the playground seemed to come alive. The sandbox rippled like water boiling, small hands pressing up from below, dragging faint shapes toward the surface. The swings twisted, their chains groaning, turning slowly to face the row of houses. The monkey bars bent, just slightly, as the shadow uncurled, rising to its full height, tall and thin as smoke. And the house across the way leaned forward, its windows flaring with pale light, as if the walls themselves were straining to see. Then came the laughter. Not one voice, not two, but many. Children's giggles laced with cries, layered over deeper tones that did not belong to children at all. The sound spilled across the neighborhood, rattling through the windows, filling every room. Parents clutched their children, covering ears, but the laughter was not heard through air. It sank directly into the bones, echoing in skulls like a memory no one wanted. Lights flicked on, phones rang, but no one dared step outside except one. A man from 3 houses down, perhaps braver or more foolish than the rest, staggered across the street, his eyes wide as though caught in a trance. He walked toward the fence, ignoring the voices screaming for him to stop. His feet crossed the line of shadow where the streetlights faltered, and he vanished from sight. Some swore he never even reached the gate, that the ground swallowed him whole before he could touch it. Others insisted they saw the shadow waiting, arms stretched open, wrapping him in its dark embrace. Either way, he did not return. The playground grew louder. The whispers rose into words now, distinct enough to understand. "Come play," they begged. "Stay with us. Stay forever." The voices overlapped, hundreds of them, each one desperate, pleading, and cruel. Children in their beds wept, clutching pillows, recognizing voices they had once known, friends who had vanished, classmates who had moved away. Some swore they heard their own names, called again and again, softer, sweeter, until they nearly answered, and then, as suddenly as it began, silence fell. Utter silence. No creak, no whisper, no breath. For one moment, it seemed the nightmare had passed. But when the air stilled, the playground was no longer the same. The swing sets stood taller, chains gleaming though untouched by light. The sandbox had grown deeper, a pit now, its edges sharp and unnatural. The monkey bars twisted, warped into a cage-like shape. And the shadow, no longer a smear on the ground, stood fully upright, towering, its form flickering with dozens of faces, children's eyes opening and closing across its surface. The house across the street shuddered, shutters slamming, windows glowing white. Its door groaned open, not from wind, but as if something inside had been waiting too long. A howl poured from it, cold and hollow, sweeping across the neighborhood until every tree bent low. The playground and the house pulsed together, one rhythm, one breath, as if they were not separate at all, but organs of the same body. Finally awake, panic spread. Families fled, some packing, some leaving everything behind. Cars sped off into the night, engines screaming. But not all escaped. Those who looked back swore they saw figures standing in the playground now, children, dozens of them, holding hands, eyes pale and empty. Their mouths moved in silence, chanting in rhythm with the swings. And behind them, taller, darker, the shadow loomed, arms spreading wide like a shepherd gathering a flock. The neighborhood was never the same again. The houses emptied one by one until only silence reigned. But silence was not safety. For on certain nights, when the fog rolls thick and the moon hides, travelers still report hearing it, the faint creak of chains, the distant echo of children laughing where no children live. Some swear they see a playground standing alone in the mist, swings swaying though the wind is still. And if they look too long, they notice the sand shifting, the shadow turning, the house leaning closer. Always closer. No one dares enter anymore. But the playground waits, patient, hungry, breathing still. And if you ever find yourself walking through a quiet neighborhood at night, when the air feels heavy and the world too still, listen closely. If you hear the faint creak of chains in the dark, do not follow it. Do not look for the source, because once the playground notices you, it will never forget, and once it calls your name, you will never leave.